Hey folks, Knox with IT Inspired here. Today we are going to talk about two of my favorite technologies in one video, and they are networking and the cloud, specifically in Azure. Now, Azure's approach to networking is a little different than hardware virtualization technologies you're used to, like Hyper-V and vSphere. In a previous video, we built a Linux VM whose purpose was going to be to host a Unifi controller, and we handled all of the networking decisions during that VM creation, during the VM setup. And that's fine, and that is similar to Hyper-V or vSphere, where you make all those decisions kind of on the fly. But that's not how to actually correctly build out and plan for an Azure network. So if we're building out an enterprise-grade solution in Azure, and specifically we're planning on extending our on-premise network to the cloud via Site-to-site VPN, then we need to build out our network objects and design our networks carefully first. As I mentioned earlier, Azure handles networking and really everything a little differently than you may be used to with your on-premise technologies. In Azure, you build each piece, each item in Azure individually before you snap it all together and make something. Let me show you right here. You can see I've got my dashboard pulled up. And what we're looking at here, just to pick some things out, you can see we've got a hard disk here that you created individually. We've got a network interface card that was created individually. The public IP for that network interface card is an object that was created individually. And then we tie it all together with the VM, the Unifi VM here. Now, we can create what's called a resource group. Each of these things is considered a resource. And when we create a resource group, that gives us a clean way to group our objects together and manage them and organize them in that way. And that really is what the Azure resource model is all about. They kind of went to this resource management model a year or two ago. And now if you actually use PowerShell, you'll notice you have things like new Azure RM, whatever. That RM is for the resource module, and not too surprisingly, it requires you to specify the resource group in every commandlet that has that. So anyways, to build a site-to-site VPN, there's a lot of objects that goes on here. Now don't worry, this isn't hard, it's just different. So what we're going to do is we're going to pull up Paint and kind of talk about what we're working on doing here. Now you can kind of see I've got a pretty obvious topology here. Here's my headquarters. It's going to be an on-premise building, and we've got one router. I am going to use a Unifi USG, Universal Security Gateway, to build the site-to-site between our HQ facility here to the Azure cloud. And we've got this is obviously the Azure cloud, and we've got this circle here. So when you start out with networking in Azure, you're going to build what's called a virtual network, or what they like to call a VNet. And I'm just going to type right here a little VNet. And you're going to tell it, this is going to be my IP address block. This is not going to be the subnets that you connect your VMs to. You are declaring, I'm going to use this overarching address space up front. So for instance, let's say I'm planning on connecting my VMs to a network that is going to be called, let's say, 172.16.20.0/24. And we'll kind of take it and make this little, like a little pie chart, if you will. And we'll kind of take that slice, and it'll be 172.16.20. This will be the subnet that we're going to connect some VMs to. And then maybe we're going to have a separate subnet that might just be for backend services, and we'll make that 172.16.21.0/24. So we're planning on having these two subnets here. So you can kind of see where I'm going with this. So up front, before you can build these subnets, you have to declare the overarching address block space. So maybe you want to go with something, in this case, like 172.16.0.0/16. So that way we can say we're going to start off with a 172.16 block and kind of subnet it down. Now, of course, you don't have to use 16. If you're a large enterprise, you might actually want to use something more like a 23 so that you can build more VNets later and subnet those down to something smaller. But for this purpose, this demonstration, that's what we're going to do. We're going to use the 172.16 block. So that's going to be the VNet. And once you've got your VNet built, we're going to make the subnets inside of it. Now, to build a site-to-site VPN, I'm going to kind of put this down here. You have to build something called a gateway subnet. So I'm going to put this as 172.16.16 or something, and then maybe a /28. I think that will fit inside the block. Yeah, we won't have any problems with that. That'll work just fine. It'll be a small 16 hosts allowed to be in that subnet. And this is going to be used strictly by Azure. You will not be able to put any hosts in it, and it's just something that it uses for the site-to-site VPN connectivity. If I can get my little right here, I'm going to type in, just so that we've got this cleanly written out, this is going to be called the gateway subnet. Maybe I can move that, make it a little bit prettier. There we go. Okay, so this is just going to be used by the gateway subnet. This is not what we're going to connect VMs to. We're going to connect VMs to something like this. But you do have to appropriately plan out for the gateway subnet. A /28 is what they recommend. So that's going to be the first thing that we do, but the actual site-to-site connection then comes into play. Once you have the gateway subnet created, and we are going to walk through all of this, you have to have the gateway subnet created first, you can then build a virtual network gateway itself. So I'm going to take the little square here, and I'm going to put this here, and we're going to call this the VNet gateway. Maybe I can move that and make it a little bit prettier. So that's going to be another object that is created here, and it is going to get a public IP address. So we'll put a little square inside of that and grab our, we'll call it pip for public IP. Yeah, sorry, it's not too clean. And this is basically going to be the tool that is used to be our VPN termination endpoint for Azure. This is essentially what the USG is going to end up connecting to, is this VNet gateway. But that's not it. That's not the last thing that you need. You also have to build an object in Azure that represents your local router and your local network. This isn't going to actually be the VPN termination device. It is called a local gateway. And all it does is it represents the WAN IP and the local subnets that you're going to be sending over the site-to-site tunnel. And it knows to then, basically this is just where you're setting that configuration up in Azure. This will make a little bit more sense once we go through it. And then finally, once you have all these pieces in place, you're going to go into your VNet and we're going to click on connections, and it will actually build a connection object, which is representing this tunnel right here. And I'm going to put in here connection. We'll then go through to the USG and build out the tunnel there. We'll finish up that end of the things, and you'll have a fully functioning site-to-site VPN tunnel to Azure. So hopefully this makes sense. If not, you can obviously watch these videos again, or hit me up in comments and questions, and I'll be happy to try and work through these things, because I know this is a little different, and we're getting into a lot of big stuff already with subnetting and then site-to-site. So we're kind of jumping ahead a little bit, but this is an important topic, and I haven't found very good training materials specifically related to site-to-sites, so I wanted to make this video. All right, without further ado, I think we should just dive in and get started. So I did reorganize this stuff on the left-hand side. When you log in, yours may look a little different. You can use these little dots right here and just click and drag them wherever you want. I moved virtual machines and virtual networks to the top because well, I love infrastructure as a service, so that's what I'm going to touch on the most. So let's start out by building that VNet that we were talking about. And let's call this site-to-site or S2S-VNet. And in this address space, like we just talked about, I'm going to use 172.16.0.0/16, and we're going to be subnetting that later. I'm going to create a new resource group called site-to-site-RG for resource group. We're going to leave this in the East US. That's where I want it to be. My subnet, this is going to be the first subnet that we create. Let's call this Azure LAN. How about that? Let's spell Azure right as well. That's going to be important. And now let's actually make it a valid subnet of 172.16.20.0/24. I can leave the rest of this stuff pretty much as it is. So you can see what we're doing here is we're creating the VNet. We are declaring what our address block is going to be. We're going to create a new resource group so that we can categorize our objects that are within it. And then we're going to create a subnet for it, the very initial subnet for the Azure LAN. So I'm going to go ahead and click Create. And this will take just a second, but I'm going to hit pause while it gets created. All right, it says it was created. Let's hit refresh and see if it's there. Check it out, Site-to-site VNet. And if I want to create more subnets, there's a little spot right here called subnets. And you can come in here and create as many subnets as you want. There's no, well, I mean, there's obviously a limit to how many subnets you can create, but there's nothing that's restricting you here because this is going to be your private address space. You are separated from the other tenants. As an aside, something that's really cool, let's click on the Azure LAN real quick. And actually, let's not click on the Azure LAN real quick. I'm going to go back. What I meant to do is I meant to click on peering. So let's say I've got another VNet here, month of lunches VNet, where I was going through Azure in a month of lunches a month or so ago. If I wanted devices on this subnet to be able to communicate to devices on that subnet, as long as the address space doesn't overlap, you can go into peerings and create a peering between your VNets so that you have routability between all of your subnets or VNets. Very cool. That was just an aside. We got a little distracted here. Let's go back to subnets. And as you recall from looking at my beautiful Microsoft Paint, we need to create a gateway subnet that's to be used by Azure for the site-to-site. And looking at it, look at how easy they make this, plus gateway subnet. You don't have to really decide anything. It's going to create the subnet for you. I mean, it picks the first available CIDR block for you if you want. We don't need to give it a /24. Something like a /28 would be plenty sufficient. So let's go ahead and do that. We don't need to alter the route table, and we don't need to alter service endpoints either. Look, it also has gateway subnet grayed out. That's because Azure has to use that name for when you go to the next part and build the virtual network gateway. So let's go ahead and click OK to create that subnet, and this will only take a second. And just like that, it's created, and we have the gateway subnet. Perfect. All right. Let's get into actually building the big stuff. So what I'm going to do right here is I'm going to click on Create a Resource. And I'm going to, actually what you can do is you can come right down here to the networking section and check it out. Virtual Network Gateway. So that's going to be the VPN endpoint for Azure. And the local network gateway, which is just going to be the object that represents your local network, in this case a Unifi controller and my local subnet. So let's go ahead and click on Virtual Network Gateway to get this one created first. Now, fair warning, this process can take an extremely long time. In fact, look at the very bottom. Provisioning a virtual network gateway may take up to 45 minutes. The last time I did this, it did take about a half an hour. So yeah, plan for that. If you need to spin up a site-to-site VPN quickly, you may rather consider deploying a virtual firewall than going down this route. Of course, the virtual firewall will cost you significantly more money than this. The SKU is where you actually choose how much this VPN SLA is and how much you pay for it. So there are a few options here, and they change based on your location. Basic will typically cost you around 30-ish bucks a month. And you can dig into these SKUs a little bit more and find out what you need, what your SLAs are that you must have in order to build your site-to-site. But if you're a small to medium-sized business, my hunch is that Basic will work fine for you. If you do have more advanced needs, like a active-active failover situation or 2 VPN tunnels concentrating on the same gateway here, then you would have to go with something more higher performance, which would be these VPN gateways. In fact, you see how your options change a little bit when you click on them. So, do pay attention to those items. See, you can't click the enable active mode right now. So anyways, let's give this a name. Let's call this Azure Site-to-site Virtual Network Gateway, VNG. How about that? Does that make sense? Makes sense to me. And now we get to choose our VNet. Obviously, we're going to be using the site-to-site VNet that we created. Public IP address. Obviously, we need a public IP address to do this. If I had already pre-created a public IP address, you would be able to select it from this list. In this case, we're going to go with basic. That's fine. Again, if we're going to be using a load balancer or something, then we would have to use some different options. Let's just go with basic and to build this public IP address. And the subscription and East US, everything here looks good. All right. Now, notice it did automatically grab the site-to-site resource group that we are putting this stuff in. That's because that VNet has a gateway subnet. I'm assuming, or I'm pretty sure that if you had more subnets or more VNets with multiple gateway subnets, then you would have to select one. But it was able to detect right away where that gateway subnet is, and we are ready to click create. So at this point, I'm definitely going to pause it because it's going to take a very long time to create this. Not a very long time, but up to 45 minutes. I'm also going to pin it to the dashboard so that I can keep a good visual on it. Let's hit create. And it is deploying, so I am going to pause it now. We'll see you back in a few minutes. All right, after about 20 to 30 minutes, we can see that the deployment succeeded, and we now have a VPN gateway. Very cool. All right, so let us, and also you probably want to document the public IP that's right here. So it's got this little copy button. I'm going to click copy, and I'm going to paste it somewhere else so that I can come back to it later. All right, now let us carry on, and we will move forward with creating the local network gateway, which again is going to represent, it's just going to be an object that represents the items that we have going on in the HQ section here. So it's going to be this little Unifi router and all my little LAN subnets that we have. So let's call this local-S2S virtual network gateway. Now the IP address here, this is going to be the peer IP address, for security and safety reasons. I'm not going to fill this out with my public IP address at the time. I'm just going to put 1.2.3.4. You will find out what your router's public IP address is, or your firewall device, and you will put it here that you're going to be connecting to. Okay, and then the next section, the address space, that's going to be your LAN subnets that we're going to be adding here that you are expecting to come across the tunnel towards Azure. So I know in my LAN I have this subnet as well as this subnet. So we can just add those. We've got the green check marks. They look good. Let's do use existing, and we're going to put in our site-to-site resource group. And then we will click create. Now I'm going to pause it, type in the right IP address, and then click create. So you can go ahead and click create if you've correctly filled this out. Okay, I click create after changing my IP address. The deployment is in progress. This one should go a little bit quicker, but I'm going to pause it just in case. And after a couple seconds, that deployment succeeded. So yeah, as promised, it goes pretty quickly. All right, let's go ahead now. And, I think we should do the Unifi section next. So let's hop over to my Unifi controller. This is the same controller we spun up in that Linux VM earlier. I've got just a couple LAN subnets, as indicated. You saw earlier the 10.10.20 and 10.10.10. To create a VPN, site-to-site VPN in Unifi, you just log into your Unifi controller, come down here to the gears, and what you do is you create a new network. So I'll click create a new network. I'll choose site-to-site VPN. I'll give this a name, and I'll call it Azure Site-to-Site. How about that? That's fine. We're going to choose manual IPSec tunnel. And one of the things we're going to do right off the bat, this IPSec profile dropdown, choose Azure Dynamic Routing. All right, so let's go ahead and add the remote subnets. Now, let's recall what our remote subnet was. Let's go to virtual networks. We can close our notifications and check out the remote subnets. All right, we've got 172.16.20. And I'm going to put the gateway subnet just to be safe. I don't think there's any real reason to put it there, but let's just do it anyways. /28, right? 16 / yeah, that's what we got. Cool. All right, so the peer IP, this is going to be the remote public IP address that Azure gave us. I documented that. I'm just going to paste it in. My local WAN IP, this is going to be that same WAN or peer IP that you put for the local network gateway. If you recall, I put 1.2.3.4 and then later changed it. So you can go ahead and put your public IP address of this Unifi controller right there. If you had more than one public IP because you had 2 LANs, that's obviously what you would use. We're going to use a pre-shared key. So just go ahead and type something in that you want to use. Now come in here and choose the advanced options, just expand it and uncheck these 2 boxes. You can leave these as IKV2, AES-256, SHA-1, and Diffie-Hellman Group 2, but just uncheck these 2 boxes. So recapping, we gave it a name, we chose Site-to-site VPN, we chose manual IPSec. The remote subnets were the subnets that we created when we set up the VNet. The peer IP is that public IP address. Again, I can show you where to go to get that. Let's go to my dashboard, and we can actually just go to all resources. That'll be a quicker way to get it. And let's go to the Azure Site-to-site VNet group, the one that we created here. It's got a public IP address object. If we click on that, you can see what your public IP address is right there. So that's what we're going to put here. Is going to be the peer, the local WAN IP. This is going to be the WAN IP on this Unifi device, which I'm going to change. And then you click Save when you're done. So I'm going to pause it, change my IP, and then click Save. Okay, so that is created, and it's probably trying to set up a site-to-site VPN tunnel right now. Now, we haven't configured that portion on the Azure network yet. So let's go back to our virtual networks. Let's go into the site-to-site VNet. And once you're here, you'll now see you have a connected device, and that is your virtual network gateway, and it's connected into the gateway subnet. So let's click on that, and it'll bring you into that device again, and you can see there's your public IP address on it and everything. What we're going to be setting up here is the connection itself. So let's click Connections. And obviously what we want to do is we want to add a connection. So let's call this my, I don't know, something final site-to-site tunnel, or I just make up anything. This is not going to be a VNet to VNet connection type. This is going to be a site-to-site IPSec type. The Azure Virtual Network Gateway is obviously the one that it's got created, and it's got it locked. You can't change it. But the local network gateway is going to be the one that you created earlier. It wants a pre-share key, which you're going to type in the pre-share key that you typed in here. I did not use password 123, but you absolutely could. So do type in the same pre-share key that you had here, and when you're done, you'll just click OK. So I'm going to type in my pre-share key. I'm going to pause it while I do that, and then click OK. And now that I clicked OK, just like that, it is creating the connection. So I'll pause it while that connection gets created, and hopefully when it's done, we'll give it a couple minutes, and we'll see the status is going to go from updating, connecting, and then hopefully it'll finally move to connected. So I'm going to pause it while that happens. Hey, that's a pretty good sign. Succeeded is now showing up here. I like the look of that. You know, one other way I can tell, just switch to unknown. Let's take a look. So it's possible that one of the reasons I'm getting unknown is because I have no resources, no VMs actually connected to this VNet, and no traffic actually traversing the tunnel. So there's no destination on either end that it's trying to reach, so that we can't actually track data going across the tunnel right now. Chances are if I spun up a VM and actually had traffic pinging across, this would absolutely show up. But I do keep getting the flashing of succeeded because the tunnel negotiations itself is working. Another way I can verify that is by going to my Unifi controller and looking right on the splash page here. We've got a positive active green VPN tunnel. Again, you can't really see any metrics that are going across it because no traffic is going across it. I have no resources in Azure on that VNet to ping. But if I created a VM in it, like a Windows Server VM, I could more than likely ping across it, and we would have a happy site-to-site tunnel. And just to show you I'm not a liar, I actually just created a virtual machine and connected it to that VNet. It is a Windows Server 2016 VM. As you can see, I gave it the standard B1MS size, a little bit bigger than the B1S size we used last time. And in fact, I can kind of show you the pricing for something like this in the East US. A B1MS is going to cost you the whopping $18.25 a month if you choose to go with pay-as-you-go. One thing worth pointing out is you can do 3 years prepaid in Azure, and look at what that does to your pricing. I mean, that is substantial. You could create a perfectly fine, stable virtual machine, lightweight, maybe like a domain controller for a small business in the B1MS instance, and prepay 3 years only costs you $10 a month. Isn't that something? So, now that I've got this connected, what I want to check out real quick is let's go back to my dashboard and let's check out that virtual network gateway that we created. So here we are. Let's go to connections, and let's see. Now the tunnel shows connected, and the pièce de résistance is, of course, if we can actually connect to this thing. It was 172.16.20.4 port 3389. Let's go ahead and give it the new creds. There was no public IP address on that VM, and it's looking good. And we are remoted in to a virtual machine in a different state hosted in Azure. How cool is that? That is it. That is Azure networking. That is how to extend your on-premise network to the Azure cloud using site-to-site VPN technologies like the IPSec tunnel. I really hope you've enjoyed doing this with me. I love this stuff. I love doing this type of work. So if you have any questions, feel free to comment in the spots below in YouTube. Do follow and subscribe to the YouTube channel as well as the IT Inspired Facebook page. Get out there and try it out.